Hey, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from the... Is my audio in sync?
It looks like
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's a new place. I haven't heard of that place before.
Yeah, well, I was on the boot.dev podcast, and when it got released on YouTube, I'm like half a second off.
Ooh.
So
Yes.
It looks terrible. And I was trying to figure it out, and as far as I could tell, my audio's in sync on this end.
I can see lag too now that you say it.
Yeah, there is a slight lag.
if
slight.
you're looking for it, you can see it.
Oh, well, that's what we need to know, because I can fix that extremely easily. I can fix that with... Okay, is the lag better or worse?
Not fixed.
About the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
How about now? Is it better
Troubleshooting
now?
live on the show.
I know, that's what
Yeah.
I was about to say too.
Yeah, I think it looks better now, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, deal.
All right.
100 millisecond delay.
This is how the sausage is made. Yes.
This is how the sausage is made. Coming at you live from how the sausage is made.
I think there is still I would add another 100 millisecond, by the way.
All right, thanks.
All right. We also have Dan Shapir,
Hey, from an Israel still at war.
Steve Edwards,
I'm only one yo, not yo, from
That's right.
very foggy Portland area where we need more snow.
Yeah, I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and I'm going to tell y'all to go over to topenddevs.com/calendar. We have a whole bunch of stuff coming up, and I'm super excited to be working with folks to help them get ahead and figure things out. So, this week we're going to be talking about TypeScript and JavaScript. And Dan, you've done a whole bunch of Twitter polls that you wanted to talk through, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing that you're doing there. Do you want to give us a little bit of backstory though on like what prompted you to ask these questions and why these particular ones?
Yeah, well, as you said, over the past couple of weeks, I've been running a series of polls. They're actually fairly easy to find on my account because I more or less phrased all of them the same way. All of them start with a question: what kind of a JS/TS dev are you? And then I pose a particular question, and we will go through the list of questions. Now, the reason is that, as we know, and as AJ loves, there are multiple ways to do anything in JavaScript. And over the past number of years, the number of ways has been steadily increasing. And all the tooling is also influencing the way in which we're using JavaScript. And it kind of made me curious about, are developers primarily using the new ways, the old ways? I've been surprised by some of the things that I've seen people do. I review a lot of code. I've been surprised by things I see in code. Now, we've got tools like Prettier and whatnot to kind of rectify a lot of the, various discrepancies that creep into our code. But be that as it may, I was really interested in, how people, what are their default preferences, as it were. And so I started running these polls, just, various questions that popped into my head about the ways in which people are using JavaScript or TypeScript or both. And sometimes I was surprised by the answers, sometimes less so. And I thought that it would be a great topic to discuss, especially in this episode, which we're recording on January 1st. So it's kind of like the beginning of the new year, and trying to kind of take stock where we all are as web developers or JavaScript developers. So as you said, I've ran this whole bunch of questions. I doubt that we will have time to go through all of them. But we will see. Maybe we'll have more for an additional episode. Maybe I'll have ideas for more questions to ask following this episode. But I've copied all the questions and the answers that I got. I didn't organize them according to the order in which I asked them, because that was pretty random as things occurred to me. Rather, I tried to group them and also kind of sort them from the more general, you might say, to the more specific. So we will see how it goes and how far down the list we can get.
Makes sense.
So the first question which I asked, the first question on the poll, and one of the questions that got the most votes, it got something like 376 votes, not like exactly. And the question was about the usage of, you might say, TypeScript versus JavaScript. So I basically gave 4 options: TypeScript without any, TypeScript with any, JSDoc, and JavaScript without any explicit types. Now, it's important to kind of emphasize that what I meant by TypeScript without any is not that there's absolutely positively no use of any anywhere in the code, rather than an effort is made in order to get rid of any as much as makes sense.
Right.
So it's about people who take a more strict attitude towards TypeScript versus those that take a more lax kind of attitude towards TypeScript. But you might say that both these groups actually use TypeScript. In fact, I might argue that anybody who's using JSDoc is effectively also using TypeScript, just with a different syntax and different
Right.
tool chain.
And the makers of Svelte would agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also worth mentioning that, one of the Twitter brouhahas that we had back in 2023, so long ago, was the one started by DHH about whether or not using explicit types is a good thing or not, and whether we should be just using JavaScript with dynamic types, or should we be converting to static typing as much as we can. And it's important to emphasize that difference between a DHH take and the one taken, let's say, in Svelte, which you mentioned, where they ditched the TypeScript syntax, but not the TypeScript approach, because as Steve said, they embraced JSDoc. So if we look at the results, we see that almost 55% use TypeScript without any. Then
Can you bring that
another,
up on screen?
yeah, the numbers are 55% almost use TypeScript without any, 20% use TypeScript with any, another 14% use JSDoc, and then
Woohoo!
and then 12 and then 12% just use JavaScript.
I think I
Now,
voted in this one, and I think I was the last because I've been too lazy to really deeply go for any of it.
so you're just using JavaScript and benefiting from the type information that the VS Code can provide for you, regardless, because of
Yeah,
all the bindings
basically.
for the libraries and whatnot.
Yeah, but you also have to understand that my contract is a Ruby contract, and so right, so a lot of those people are probably not writing full stack JavaScript, right? They're doing something where, hey, it pulls in the JavaScript stuff and it does the JavaScript stuff.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So
And if your usage of JavaScript is kind of minimal, and especially if you're working solo, it makes a whole lot of sense, in my opinion. I once joked or shit tweeted, or whatever you call it, that my optimal use of TypeScript is everybody uses TypeScript and I just use JavaScript and benefit from everybody else's hard work. So I totally get it. Um, and most of the organizations that I see using TypeScript actually are, multiple developers working together on the same code base. It could be like 5 people, it might be 50 people. And in those environments, it makes sense to be as strict as you possibly can about stuff.
Well, the
yeah,
moment you have to refactor something, okay, first of all, I'm not talking about TypeScript. I'm talking about types. I'm not even talking about types. I'm talking about tooling, because all of this is it really is just completely bogus entirely, because there's no such thing as types. There's only tooling. once it runs as machine code, the machine runs whatever the machine code says. The machine does not care about types whatsoever. That's how we get all the security vulnerabilities and memory corruption and all of that stuff, right? Because the machine doesn't know what types are. The types are in the tooling. And the TypeScript checker is probably the best tooling that we have in JavaScript. I think we could have something way better. I think it pales in comparison to what somebody just looking at JavaScript as a language could come up with if they had the resources that the TypeScript team had, right? But JSDoc and the TypeScript checker gives you tooling that lets you know when things are out of alignment. So you misspell something. You misspell a property name. You get the spell check on it. You need to change the name and type of something. Say that you did the dummy thing and you put in the amount as a float, but you realize, oh, that should be a string instead because it's money and floats don't mix, right? And so you change it to a string. It gives you that capability to get errors where you forgot something. And I think that's really where the core value of it is.
Well, I have to say, first of all, that these days, if you're doing money in JavaScript, you should be using like big int rather than strings.
Oh, sure. Yeah, pardon my French. Yes.
But it's interesting that I agree with the gist of what you said, but I do disagree with some of the details. I think you're correct about the runtime not caring that much about types in terms of the machine code. Although, it does, these days the CPUs do differentiate between floats and ints and stuff like that. But the types in many programming languages do determine the code that gets generated. It's interesting that in the TypeScript JavaScript combination, all the type information is effectively jettisoned, and then the JavaScript engine kind of needs to infer the stuff dynamically at runtime and generate the code based on that, on what it actually encounters and sees. And totally disregard the information that it had, probably correct information that it might have had in TypeScript.
Yes, but if you are using, and again, not TypeScript, but if you are using JavaScript types and you're using them consistently, if you're only using, if you never switch a variable name between what type it is, so you do strict typing, and then you also use specific types for a specific purpose, strong typing, then you will, when the JIT optimizer looks at your object, if you provide it the object that you're going to use from the start and you use it the same way throughout, then it's going to be optimized. If you're switching up the way you're using it, it can't optimize it.
Again, I'll slightly rephrase. If you are consistent in terms of the type information, you're making it much easier for the JIT to optimize it. It still may not optimize it. For example, if it's only run once, then it might decide that it's just not worth the effort. But yeah, by doing things poorly in terms of type consistency, you're effectively preventing the JIT from optimizing it, even if it wants to. The other point that I wanted to make is that I don't know what surprised me more. Was it the fact that 88% effectively used TypeScript, or that 12% don't? It's
well, we had a comment. Somebody said that 50% is lying, and I'm going to agree with them.
Well, just to back up, you said that TypeScript with any is, or without any is, you're making an effort to minimize any, but I don't know if I get that from this question. So
Oh, I added it in a follow-up comment. I should have
Okay.
probably specified it more explicitly in the original question. But if that's the case, if people read it to be, really without any, then 55%, yeah,
Is very
they're
optimistic. Yeah.
is very optimistic. Yeah. Um, yes. From what I'm seeing in the real world, um, then there's much more use of any than we would like. By the way, yeah, I remembered one more thing that I wanted to say about what you mentioned before, AJ. I actually think that the TypeScript team have done an amazing work of corralling what is likely the most dynamic of any of all dynamic languages into some sort of static type system. JavaScript was not designed with static typing in mind. This is not OCaml. This is not Haskell,
Right.
and being able to retrofit a sane static type system. You can argue the sane part, but
Yes.
being able to retrofit something like that on top of JavaScript
Mhm.
is pretty amazing. I'll give you an example. Think about a method like document dot create element. The type returned depends on this value of the string passed into the function. So, that's something that's really kind of difficult to do if you think about it. Making the return type conditioned on the value of the argument.
Well, I think this is where languages need to go, and this is one of the things that Zig has maybe not pioneered but advertises. There's no reason that your tooling shouldn't be able to look at your code and effectively run whatever is runnable at dev time. Like it shouldn't have to wait until it's machine code to be able to understand, oh, this string, it's obviously the word div, you know? So I'm not as impressed by that as I am disappointed that it's taken this long and has so few implementations.
There's a whole other topic which I think is beyond the scope today, which is about the fact that TypeScript really has effectively like two levels. There's the level of usage by most application developers, and then there's the level used by library creators, which is much more difficult and makes much more use of things like generics and stuff like that in order to make the interfaces as type safe as possible. And sometimes that does require a lot of know-how and effort. But again, I think that kind of goes beyond the scope of how much we want to talk about that particular question. Otherwise, we'll never get to any of the others.
Yeah.
Sure. But
So
to that end, did you hear about Floppy Bird being implemented in TypeScript?
well, yes, I did. And it's not surprising because in order to do, once you introduce generics into the type system, you've effectively made your type system a programming language.
Yeah. And by TypeScript I meant not TypeScript but the types of
Yeah, the
TypeScript.
TypeScript types.
Yeah. The
I,
type
I,
yeah.
I've seen similar things, by the way, done in, for example, in C++, once when C++ got generics, the C++ template system. Because again, once you throw in generics and stuff like that, then effectively it becomes a programming language. You can start doing
Mhm.
conditionals and loops, and from that point on, you're off to the races.
Right.
Okay, next question. The next question was, and here I need to thank a few people. We will link to. I won't try to read the names. We can link uh, to the actual list of tweets, and the people can see it. Basically, it was to see whether or not people are using semicolons or not, because again, this became a whole Twitter debate all over again, surprisingly so. I really didn't expect it in 2023, but here we are. Whether or not you use semicolons at the end of JavaScript statements. Now, obviously, we've got tools like Prettier that can add it or remove it depending on your own preferences. My question was mainly about what is your preference? What do you prefer to do? How do you prefer to write your JavaScript code? And I'm happy to see that the majority prefer semicolons because that's also my preference. Anybody here likes of you know not putting in semicolons explicitly?
So
Coming from the PHP world where they're required, it's just sort of habit anymore. For me, it just makes neater and easier to read code. And there's times where code won't have a semicolon, but that's pretty rare for me.
yeah, at the risk of dragging DHH back into this, so most of his JavaScript code samples don't have them, which is kind of funny because I prefer putting them in. Um, I get that we have automatic semicolon insertion and other things that make it so that, generally you don't have to put them in. I I just I don't know. For me, it's kind of just an explicit, hey, I, anyway, I put them in. I'm actually, I feel like 70%,
Yeah,
75% are right here.
yeah. My take on this is that again, it's not that semicolons are optional in JavaScript. It's that we have ASI, automatic semicolon insertion, which basically means that the JavaScript parser parses stuff, errors out because there's a missing semicolon, and when it does, it catches that error and then tries to figure out where's the most logical place to insert that missing semicolon. And I don't like my tooling doing guesses about
Yeah.
where semicolons should go. uh you know
I like magic in my code, but not this kind of magic.
That's one of the things that's nice about Prettier is when you accidentally forget a semicolon or whatever, Prettier reformats your code in such a way that it is clearly obvious that the structure of the code and the way it's executing has changed. But I will also say one of the reasons that I'm against not using semicolons is that they are required because there's a list of edge cases that you have to be aware of. And you can either choose to just always put a semicolon, or you can carry around in your head that list of like 5 or 7 checks and then always be thinking about, like, every single time you don't insert a semicolon, is it breaking any of these 5 or 7 rules? And if you are willing to do that mental gymnastics, then you don't need semicolons. um, However, I've found a very, very simple list of rules that I believe also would eliminate the need for semicolons, which is if you either always capture the result of a function or use the keyword void to explicitly disregard what the return of the function
Java
is.
and JavaScript are the same. I knew it. Boy,
And
knew it.
if you never do something that requires parentheses in the order of operations fashion, like if you always split multiplication and addition onto 2 lines, or something like that, anything that would require parentheses to be able to
yeah, and,
dictate
and
the
and
order.
be careful of the return keyword and other various rules. Just easier to use semicolons.
Oh
uh
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with the tooling that we have, but I believe that we could have a version of JavaScript that doesn't require semicolons,
oh,
which would be
for sure.
nice if we could get there. But it would require it following other rules that people don't follow. Anyway,
Yeah, it'd
just
be called Python.
I was actually going to call it AI script, but
There we go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, moving on to the next one. Another question about how people write or style, more precisely, their JavaScript code. And this one is about how do you write a named function. And the two options are either to be old school and use the function keyword. So let's say it's function foo, open parentheses bar, close parentheses, and then, open curly brackets and so forth. The other option, which I'm seeing a lot in code these days, is using an assignment of the function expression. So you would do something like const foo equals a bar arrow and then the curly brackets. So it's assigning a function expression into a named variable or identifier, more precisely. Now, here it was fairly evenly split, but still 55% preferred the good old fashion function keyword, which I'm happy to say is what I also prefer. And by the way, an important point to make here is that when I look at the code base, if it doesn't use the approach that I prefer, I don't change it. I maintain consistency with the code base.
Wow, that's very mature of you,
I know.
Dan.
I know.
I have to say that readability wise, I prefer the bottom one, but I am freaking lazy. And so I very often do the top one.
But why don't you just make F in a macro? Like, if you want to be lazy, be really lazy. Like, use the tools.
That's too
Why
much
are you
work.
typing out the whole word const when you could just type FN and tab?
Now I feel bad.
To be honest, I really don't know why people preferred the assignment of the arrow. Maybe it's look. There is the one benefit, or there are a few benefits. First of all, it does explicitly make the identifier immutable, which is probably what you want in a function in like 99.9% of the time. Another advantage is that this is not bound, which is again is what you generally want these days. And another advantage is that the arguments object doesn't exist, and the argument object is something that you probably don't want to use anyway these days. Other than that, I don't see it seems less readable to me. Like saying something is a function is a much more explicit way of saying something is a function, and I like my code to be explicit. The other thing is hoisting. I like hoisting. With the assignment, it's not hoisted, and you can get into trouble in unexpected scenarios.
So, what do you think about exports.foo equals, or exports being a stand-in for the larger object? People.getName equals, etc.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, most of the time you have a function, it's on an object, right? So you just...
No, not necessarily. A lot of my code just has a lot of exported functions. Not necessarily a lot, but one or more exported functions from a file, from a module.
Right. So what I'm saying is you just assign the function to the object that gets exported.
No, I use the export keyword.
You can't be saved.
So you can destructure then? So you can destructure, or?
No, he's just using CommonJS. That's the thing. It took me a moment to realize what he meant.
Well, even if it's not CommonJS, I mean, just having whatever object you're exporting be the thing that you attach the functions to.
But why? Why not just have export on the functions or on the identifiers as you can these days in modern JavaScript?
Well, because then you have it's just a lot more to parse. It's a lot like if you try to grep through the code, it's a lot easier to see the getName function attached to person than it is to see a bunch of getName functions across the code base through the different, like there's a getName in person, there's a getName in dog, there's a getName in cat.
I get what you're saying. Things. Yeah, I get what you're saying. The way that I deal with it is, first of all, that's the reason that I like hoisting is that I put the exported stuff at the top. So it's not as if you'll see something exported and then a lot of unexported stuff and then another exported something,
Mm.
as soon. So that's one thing.
Oh,
Another
so you're
thing is,
hoisting, just to back up for people who are really new to JavaScript. So what hoisting does is if you declare a variable, it'll move it to the top of your, when it does its stuff. And that way you can put the exported stuff at the top. And since you have, by the property of hoisting, anything you declare lower that's going to be used by the stuff you're exporting will get moved up above, right? It's available to the things at the top, even though
exactly,
you haven't declared it yet.
assuming you use the function keyword.
Right, right.
uh, and So that's one. Another thing is that I tend to keep my modules small. So it's not as if I'm going to be exporting 100 things out of the same file. Again, unless it's like this special, like some people like coalesce a lot of the exports into the like sort of an
Mhm.
index file at the root of a
Mm.
library or something, so to make it easier to import things. But for most actual implementations, I don't export a ton of stuff. So again, you don't need to scan a large amount of code just to find all the exports.
So,
But I do get what you're saying, AJ. There is merit in that. If you're exporting something that feels like an interface, it makes sense to like put it all within an object or something.
Well, yeah,
so
I
I
mean, just so you can see what's public at a glance, and when you grep through the code, you can easily find, like, show me everything, show me all the methods that are exported from person at a glance. I can just grep person dot, right?
And
And
you
then I can
also can get
see.
potentially easier completion.
I don't use
Because
completion, but maybe
so
it takes too long to pop up on the screen. I can finish typing it by the time that would happen.
we did have a comment here, and I think it's an interesting kind of. I know you're talking about named functions here, but and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Bolagico. Anyway, he says, "Good old function every day, all day. The only time I use the arrow function are in callback." So I guess the question that I'm aiming at here is, do you ever use arrow functions for
Oh
anonymous
yeah, for
functions,
sure,
or
for sure. The name implies describes their use, their
right?
function expressions. So whenever I need uh, um, a function, a lambda, effectively within an expression, I use arrows. So
Okay.
I'm a big fan, for example, of chaining. Using stuff like
Hmm.
map or filter, stuff like
Right.
that. And in those, unless it's some sort of a reusable code or really complex, let's say filter that you probably don't want overly complicated filters and functions anyway. But otherwise, I definitely use function expressions there or
Uh
lambdas,
huh.
and then I definitely use arrows.
Okay.
I never, you can use the function keyword for lambdas. That's the old school way of
Yeah, you just don't
implementing
give it
them.
a name.
Exactly. I don't do that
So
anymore.
Okay.
the problem with that, with the lambda expression style, is that the opening and closing curly braces become ambiguous, and so it's very difficult to tell whether you're returning an object or whether you're defining a block. And that's my beef there. I've had bugs pop up with that multiple times.
Yeah, it's always a block, and if you really want it to be an object, you need to surround it in parentheses.
With yeah, so then it looks,
It
yeah.
looks
Anyway,
odd. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm hard against the implicit parentheses.
Mm. Yeah, but again, this has to do with the whole expression thing that it's,
Yeah.
but yeah, I can see your point, nothing's perfect. Moving on to the next one, I was just curious how people use, how people write strings these days. Do they use single quotes, double quotes, backticks? What do they use for simple strings? And not surprisingly, the majority prefer single quotes. It's not surprising to me because why press the shift key when you don't have to?
I looked at that one and I was trying to decide why anybody cared.
Oh, I was
So-
just curious.
Yeah.
You know, you do you. By the way, interestingly, in the old days of JavaScript, and like I'm talking like 15, 20 years ago, as I recall, most people did the double quotes.
Mhm.
And it kind of changed over the past decade or two from what I experienced.
So I write the single quotes, but I commit the double quotes because every time I write single quotes, it just gets transpiled to double quotes with prettier. The reason for that is that in every other programming language, single quotes are constants and double quotes are expressions. So I tend to only use single quotes intentionally when it's something that is a constant value. And I use double quotes in general because usually you're doing expressions, you're not doing
Yeah.
constants.
Uh, well, I'm not sure what you mean by expression versus constant, really.
Yeah.
Can you?
Never
I do.
mind.
Yeah,
I
in
can
Ruby,
say,
the difference is that you can interpolate within double quotes and you can't
Yes.
within single quotes.
Right.
yeah. So in
Um,
Ruby, double quotes are like the backticks, aren't they? Kind of like.
kind of,
And
but
in Python.
So
yeah,
Python has the R or the what is it? Anyway.
but the thing is that people tried to make all kinds of arguments about like performance and stuff like that, and I just haven't seen
Right.
anything there that holds water. So that's why I'm saying, if people look at it and they know it's a string, then why do you care?
I will make one more. There are two reasons I initially, when I got into JavaScript, I initially tended to use double quotes was because I come from C, C++,
Uh-huh.
and in those languages, double quotes are zero terminated or null terminated, and single quotes are not. And usually, you want the string to be null terminated because
Usually in
that,
C,
yeah. So yeah.
If
Now
you
the
want
only
security
thing,
vulnerabilities, you definitely want the not terminated.
exactly. Now, the only comment, I'm not really surprised that hardly anybody chose the backticks. The only thing that's kind of surprising about that is that we will see later on, people do like backticks for template expressions,
Yes. That's what
and
I was going to say. Yeah.
and it's kind of funny that if a string becomes and a template expression, which it might, you need to change the
change the
quotes.
syntax. Yeah.
And then if it stops being a template expression for some reason, you need to change the quotes again, rather than just leave them as they are, which works. So you could just use backticks everywhere, but apparently people don't like that.
You can't actually. So
Why not?
I was actually on full backtick everywhere train for a while. You cannot use backticks for a key name. So if you were to create an
Oh.
object and you
Right.
put double quotes around name and then colon double quotes AJ, you cannot do backtick name colon backtick AJ. You can't do that. And I think this just goes to this is very confusing to me because we have a template syntax for keys in an object, which is to put square brackets around it. And to me, it seems, I guess they were standardized at different times. Why this seems redundant and silly. We should just be able to use the backticks as the template expression, but instead, if it's an object key, the template expression is you put brackets around the variable name.
Another interesting thing is that JSON uses double quotes.
Yes. That's thrown me off before more times than I care to remember.
Yeah, I think everybody's foot gunned that.
JSON. npm install fix JSON, and it'll usually get picked up by your editor automatically. And then when you're editing JSON and you put a single quote by mistake, it'll just swap it to double quotes. It'll also deal with the trailing commas and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the other annoying thing.
So my rule, Dan, is I'll generally default to single quotes everywhere. Double quotes if I have to quote something inside a single quote, like say an attribute inside of a template, like in a view single file component in the template portion. And then the only time I ever find myself using backticks is when I need to do a template string. And the example that I've been using a lot lately is if I'm defining a poster, a get URL within my view component, and it requires a dynamic value like an ID value, as part of the string or something dynamic, then I'll use the backtick with the $ curly brackets around it. But general rule is single unless I have to otherwise.
So the vast majority agree with you, Steve, and that also exactly goes to the next question on my list, which was about building a string from a static value and the dynamic value. So would you write greet equals hello plus name, or greet equals backtick hello dollar curly bracket name curly bracket? And it's amazing to see how popular template strings have become. People have told me that it's not really surprising because most default ESLint rules or linting rules now we kind of enforce this approach, so people really got used to it. But still, it's interesting that so many people just prefer to use the template literals.
Well, it makes
over.
sense. It makes sense because basically you're not switching in and out of your context. You don't have to do like hello
Mm.
plus space plus string variable plus comment and quotes. But in this, you can just do it all in one fell swoop without having to switch context like that.
Well,
And-
and in my opinion, it's easier to parse because the plus with the quotes, it blends into one line more easily. The dollar bracket stands out more, and so where you're sticking dynamic values into that sucker.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
at least in my IDE, and I'm assuming I use PHP Storm. I'm assuming it does the most. It will highlight those colors. You
Yep.
make it so
Yeah.
it highlights your template strings, and they stand out more easily.
Yeah,
when
so I
you're
know
reading your
exactly
lines.
what I did. And that's always my issue is how can I make it easier for future me or some other idiot, but it's usually future me that's the idiot. Right. to look at this and go, "Oh, I can easily see what's going on here."
Yeah.
Yeah, and the vast majority agree with you, like
So-
88.4%. Yes, AJ.
The what convinced me on this, because I've gone every which way with the template strings, unfortunately, because there's no consistent way to use them. I wish that there was a consistent way to use them, but there's an edge case where they don't work no matter which style of coding you prefer, that like you just run into something where you can't be consistent in the way you use strings in JavaScript. But 365 JS things, which is I guess his Twitter handle is actually at unique name, but this is Corey Brown. He made the argument that it's easier for you and the interpreter because you don't have to worry about order of operations errors or concatenation type changes. So if
didn't even
you
think of that.
are putting the two things inside the template string, they're both going to be strings. So if one happens to be a number and the other happens to be a number, if you use plus, but you were thinking that you were assigning a string, you're actually, that's kind of a weird case, but still, weird cases are where the bugs come from.
I
So-
know, and by the way, one of the most like if I could have gone back in time and whispered on Brendan Eich's ears, back when he was creating JavaScript, one of the things that I would have suggested to him would have been to use a different operator for addition versus concatenation of strings.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
this gives you that. That's
Yeah, effectively it does.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next one. We're entering a new topic, which is array processing. So I asked a bunch of questions about, the ways in which people work with arrays. And the first question is kind of like the most basic one, and which is how would you iterate over an array in the scenario where you kind of in the side effect scenario. So forget, for example, about something like a map or a filter. Let's say I want to log all the values of an array, or I want to send over the network all the values of an array, or I want to add to the DOM all the values of an array, or something like that. How would you iterate over the array? The first option is the old school one, which is, I equals 0, I less than a dot length, I plus plus. The next one is the more modern use of for of. It might be for const v of a. And the last one is the dot for each. And
Well, I
again,
guess it depends what you want to do. Oh, by the way, is an array like an array? Just kidding. Just kidding.
You and
So yeah, it's interesting. I generally like to use for each. I guess the caveat here, Dan, is what you're trying to do as compared to something like a map or filter, right? You just want to do something to whatever item is. You don't necessarily want to filter out certain items or only extract certain items from your
yeah, I
array
like
to another
as
one.
I said before, I like chaining. So when I can chain stuff, I usually go for chaining. But
Right.
I explicitly wanted to look at the scenario of where you're just looping over the an array and just doing something with the values. Like I said, maybe sending them over the network or adding them to the DOM or something
Right.
like that.
I've seen
Um,
arguments that for each is performance inhibitive. Is that the best way to
uh,
say it? But it's funny, some of
there's
those arguments I see, they say, well, that's better on performance here and here, but the difference is like microscopic. So,
first of all,
Yeah.
first of all, let's say this: I'll be surprised or shocked if that's the actual performance issue in your code.
right,
And if if
exactly,
Right.
and if it
exactly,
is, prove it to me with a profiler. That's
right,
point number one. Point number two is I can think of scenarios in which for each would actually have better performance because the JavaScript engines actually optimize functions as a whole in most cases. So they either optimize the entire function or they don't optimize the entire function. With for each, they can optimize the function being invoked in the function expression being invoked inside the for each. Even if for some reason they cannot optimize the containing function. And in that scenario, you'll actually get the optimization of the code called on each iteration sooner or faster or more easily than with the others. So here's a scenario where that one might actually execute faster. But again, I highly doubt that will be the performance bottleneck in your code either way. So it's very much more of a stylistic choice than anything else. Um,
Yeah, I just want to chime in here because this was the debate in the Ruby community between the single quotes and the double quotes. Is somebody did the profiling and it was like a 20 picosecond difference, right? And so they were saying, "See, it's more performant." And I was just like, "So what you're telling me is I could just keep being lazy and I'm going to add 20 picoseconds here or there to my code? Okay, great. I'm just going to keep using double quotes."
so
so what you guys prefer? Which approach would you take?
I use for each whenever I can.
I got on the for each bus early, but then when promises were introduced, I'm not when async await was introduced.
Mm,
Eventually, I had to get off the for each async or the for each bus because
that's right.
then you end up with this what color
Yeah.
is your for loop, and I just don't want to deal with it. So I've stopped using for each map filter, all of it. Just like I've thrown it all away because it's just not worth the overhead of having to go back and refactor code for something that is, I mean, it's one line anyway.
just
But whose
saying
line
that
is it anyway?
Yeah, just saying that once async iterator helpers hit the language, whenever they finally do, you
Sorry,
you
a little delay getting there.
yeah, and now you need to stop.
Well, it had it on looping.
Yeah, and looping is the topic. All I was saying is that if and when
Perfectly timed. That was the best one of the whole 10-year run.
if and when async iterator helpers actually land in JavaScript, AJ, then you would be able, I don't know if you want to, but you would be able to go back to those iteration methods. But
Yeah, you could
It,
start
it,
doing
the,
it right again.
It'd be hard. It'd be hard to get me back on that bus because iterators introduce their own set of problems. Somebody needs to go through the 12 different standard bodies that govern JavaScript and just come out with like a unified standard of JavaScript so that we have one language, not a language and 6 implementations by different committees that don't communicate with each other. And I think that's what Winter CG is trying to do.
Winter
is trying
CG,
to actually...
that's not exactly the case. It's an aside. Winter CG is about the library code, so it's about the fetch and stuff like that, not things that are actually part of the language. The language itself is still owned by TC39 and will continue to be there. But we kind of deviated. I have to say that I was kind of surprised that more people preferred for of over for each. It was pretty close. It's 42% versus 40.5%. So it's kind of neck and neck. But it still surprised me. I was expecting far fewer people to actually use for of. I'm guessing, AJ, that it's probably because of the reason that you mentioned. People really like async await, and it's much easier to use them with for of rather than for each. And I am happy that people are ditching for I, although 18% using it is still a lot, simply because it's too much. It's TMI. It's why are you in the nitty gritty of the index and whatnot?
Because that's what they teach in your computer science class.
But this is, again, this goes back to a lack of foresight in these committees, right? Most languages that have an iterator construct, it would be for k comma v of a.
You can actually
do that here.
You can actually kind of do that. You can do const v, let's say vi of entries, so you can have both the key and the value.
Wait, okay, so this can
you
be
do
done?
you do a const open square brackets key comma value of a dot entries.
I'm gonna have to try that, because the reason that I do revert back to the I plus equals 1 loop is because there are occasions where I need access to the index for some reason. And sometimes it's modifying the original array. Sometimes it's
so instead of keys, you use entries that returns a sequence of arrays of tuples, where you've got first is the key and then the value, and you destructure them into a key and a value, effectively.
Okay. I might play with it, but I just have a sense that something will go wrong there.
The one more important thing to mention, of course, is that for of is not that, well, let's put it this way. All three actually do a different thing. So they're used for the same purpose or the very similar purpose, but each one really does a different thing. For I literally, goes over all the values from 0 to length. For of actually uses an iterator. So it's syntactic sugar for iterator, which is why A doesn't need to be an array. It can be anything which exposes an iterator. It could be a map or a set or whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's not intuitive when it works and when it doesn't. I always convert things to arrays before using it because I thought it worked in a case where the thing was an object, but then it never worked.
It works
again.
in the case that where A is an object, assuming A is an object that has an iterator.
Yeah.
And for each depends on what the implementation of for each is on that object. You can so
well, if it's standard JavaScript, it's an array.
Again, as I'm saying, I was saying they effectively do the same thing in most cases. It's just important to understand that the implementation is different.
Well, to the point of iterators, they feel like, I guess, meta programming. It's like
But
a
that's the
layer.
thing. But that's the argument we keep having, AJ. I totally agree that iterators kind of failed in JavaScript in that nobody explicitly uses iterators in JavaScript.
They're
But
scary.
everybody uses iterators implicitly in JavaScript. First of all, as you can see, almost half the people use for of, which is built on top of iterators. Everybody uses the spread operator, which is built on top of iterators. So everybody's using iterators without thinking about the fact that it's iterators under the hood.
Sure, but you don't. Okay, so let's promises. If you're using async and await without knowing how promises work, you're probably creating bugs in your code or otherwise doing it wrong. The iterator stuff, thankfully, you don't have to have ever used an iterator explicitly to use the spread operator.
I totally agree, and that's a good thing because
Yes.
iterators were meant to be used explicitly by library creators. Library, it's like it's like as a library user, you just get a nicer interface to the code, and you don't need to think about how it actually works on the inside.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to the next one, which is kind of related. It's about how do you concatenate two arrays. The two options are, again, either go old school and use the concat method.
Oh, scroll.
Yeah,
scroll so we can see it.
Here it is.
Muchas gracias.
So you can either do like A equals B concat C, or you can do the new spread thing, which is A equals open square brackets, 3 dots B, comma, 3 dots C, close square brackets. So again, the code is not the same, and there are various edge cases in which the code can behave really differently. For example, what happens if C is not an array? But in most cases, when A, B, and C are all of them, when B and C are arrays, the results are the same. So it's interesting to see, what people use, and it's interesting to see that most people, 80%, almost 80% of the people these days now prefer the spread operators inside square brackets.
Deep sigh. I love it. I heard somebody give a deep sigh.
That was me.
Yeah.
That was me.
Why am I not surprised? Why are you sighing, AJ?
For a couple things. Again, committees. In every other language, if you're doing a spread, the spread is on the right side, not the left side. That is a collect. The dots on the left side are a collector. The dots on the right side are a spreader. Okay? Syntax aside, it just is so much more complicated. Like, I don't get the preference for people to use symbols over words when the words are more clear to the most casual of observer, right? You do open bracket, close bracket, dot concat, B comma C, which is an option you didn't list there, but that's the way I actually do it.
What was your option again? Sorry.
Just a new array dot concat and then B and then C.
Okay.
But it's just so much more explicit. It's easier to read, and I just see so much code that's like arrow symbol, brackets, dots, and it's really difficult because people
it's line
basically
noise,
have reinvented Perl.
It's line noise. That's what you're saying.
Line noise, sure. And so there's a lot of JavaScript that ends up looking like Perl because it's just like arrows, dots, and just like one thing after the other. And I'm looking at, I don't know, 5 lines of code that probably should be 15, trying to figure out what the is this even doing.
It's worth. By the way, I had an interesting conversation about this with Eviatar, who we've had from Meta, who we've had on the show. He spoke about the Vest testing library, and he actually prefers concat. And there are 2 reasons that he gave. One is that concat works well with chaining. which he
Mm.
likes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you can add stuff after the closing square brackets. You can change stuff there, but then the chaining looks less natural because you got some of the chain inside the brackets and then some of the chain after the brackets. And the other reason that he liked it, which I'm more ambivalent about, and I told him so, is that concat works when C is a value rather than a collection.
That's bad. That's not good.
That's what I think, but he likes it.
Yeah, I have gotten a little bit scared sometimes because of concat. Yeah, not knowing how it will interpret something, because I want an error in that case, right? Like I want to be like,
Mhm.
oh, you effed up. You put the wrong variable in here.
By the way, once we get through arrays, we should probably call it an episode.
Yeah, for sure. So let's speed things up. We've got two more things about arrays, which is great. We've got things for next time, and I'll probably have. By the way, if either you or the listeners have ideas about additional such polls that I should run, I'd be more than happy to. If you just send me a link, either DM me or send me. By the way, to all our listeners, if you're not following us on Twitter, why? I'm Dan Shapiro on
What are
Twitter.
you
It's
thinking?
exactly. I'm just Dan Shapiro on Twitter. Follow me. I'll probably follow you back, and we can all be friends. You like me here on the podcast. You'd probably like me just as much on X. Anyway, moving to the next one. It's how to get the last item of an array. So again, we've got the old school approach, which is just use the dot length -1 inside the square brackets. Then I'll go to the other extreme. We've got the latest and greatest, which is the at method. And the at works exactly like an index, only it also supports negative values.
Just
So
like
a
Slice does.
exactly like slice. So doing an at -1 um, gives you the last value. By the way, I am slightly miffed that it's -1 rather than -0.
So it's 0 based going one way and 1 based going the other. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and by the way, JavaScript does have the concept of a -0 as an almost distinct value from 0.
Yeah, this was one of the underscore versus low dash things. His low dash handles -0 per spec.
So yeah. But anyway, it isn't. So the last item is -1 rather than -0. And the kind of the middle of the road is to use the dot slice, which supported -1 from way back when. And then you can destructure the result because the slice returns an array. So it
Or
was like,
index 0 if you don't want your code to look weird.
yeah. And
That's what I always did. I liked slice.
yeah, it's the only
yeah.
downside, of course, is we were talking overhead and the picoseconds. It actually allocates an array and copies into that array. So there is a
Oh,
slight addition of
my memory allocation.
yeah, exactly.
It's going to be a tiny bit bigger.
I've always used slice. I haven't used at, but just looking at the code, to me, it makes more sense.
I like
'Cause I'm
that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Constantly
At was a
looking
thing.
up the difference between slice and splice, and
Yeah, and at
don't use
is
it
pretty
often.
much universally supported these days. It's obviously in Node, the latest version of Node, and I think all the browsers now support it. So it just works, even if you don't use some transpilation step or whatnot. Um, but it's interesting to see that the majority of people, 55%, still go old school.
Well, they don't
still
know
use
about it. They're finding out about it today on this podcast.
Yeah.
Or when they saw
Yeah,
your
but I
survey.
gave the option on the poll. They could have said, "Hey, that's cool. I don't use it, but I'll start using it today," and they
Well,
didn't.
yeah, but then they would have still answered the poll honestly.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm with the at.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's not complicated. It's easy to understand. The only potential downside that I see, if it's not an actual array, but rather an array-like object, those abominations. But other than that, just use at.
So weird thing, at is not on can I use.
Are you sure?
You can't search for it, probably because it's a 2-letter search term.
Hmm.
I'm trying to see if I can get it. No, it is not there. At is not on can I use. So, but I have started using at for my Node code because now it's gotten mature enough in Node that I feel comfortable using it. Last time we had mentioned it on the show, I don't think that it had been in an LTS release yet or something like that. But I believe that now it actually has been in an LTS release. So it's mature enough, but I'm not sure on the browser side if browsers actually support it yet or not.
Oh, browsers do. You know what?
Oh, I found it. I found it on Can I Use. It's just it's weird. Okay, yeah. So basically, it doesn't work on any of the Asian browsers. So QQ, Baidu, KaiOS doesn't work on the Wii U or on feature phones on Android.
Yeah, but you'll probably use it when you build for those. You probably use a transpilation. Then you're fine.
Well, but if you don't want to use transpilation, if your target is people on feature phones, meaning non-paying customers or Asians, then you don't want to use it unless you transpile.
Okay, and now moving on to the last question of the day, the last question in the array category. This one is slightly contrived, or more than slightly, but still, it's interesting. Let's say you want an array where the values match the index values. So it would be an array with the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to n or whatever. So how would you create this in your code? And it does come up. I've run into this scenarios where you want it, and it's kind of annoying that there's no easy way to get it. Although in the spec they are working towards something, and we can mention it at the end. But the options that I gave are using I'll basically be reading out code. It's easy using array.from, where you can provide it with two arguments. One is just an object with a length property that whatever your n that you want to go up to, and the other is kind of a map function that you can provide as an optional second argument to the from, and you can use it to actually fill in the values into the array that you're generating. So that's option number one. Option number two is to create you might call it an empty array of length n by just using the array constructor with the value n, then use the dot fill to actually fill it with something, so that it won't be empty. So you can fill it with zeros, and then you can use the map to actually put the indexes into the array. And then finally, there's the old school approach of just using whatever loop construct you prefer with a push to push the values into what was initially an empty array. So, yeah. And interestingly, it kind of split almost, well, almost equally between these three options. Interestingly, array from is in the lead, which kind of surprised me. On the other hand, only this one was the one that got the least amount of votes. Only 71 people voted on this particular poll, and it might be skewed by the people who tend to follow me. So that's definitely a possibility there. I'm curious what you guys would have used in this scenario.
Preferring readability, and being that looking at that screenshot is absolutely no clearer than listening on the podcast, I prefer the obvious. I create a function called range, and then I do whatever I do in there, and I can't remember what I do, but it is a pain in the butt. Yes, it's weird. But I create a function called range so that it's clear what I'm doing.
How about you, Chuck? What would you use?
I do the loop and push. I didn't even know you could do the other stuff.
And Steve, how about you?
What Chuck said.
By the way, so again, Evyatar, what I've mentioned before, reminded me that an advantage of array from over the array and then the fill is that you iterate over the loop once rather than twice. Because with fill, you first iterate to fill it with 0, and then you iterate again in order to fill it with the actual index values. So it is a couple of picoseconds slower. Yeah, it's interesting. I really don't know what I would use. To be honest, I probably do what AJ just said, which is why it's really great that JavaScript standard is working on introducing a built-in range method, so that you'll be able to get such ranges, out of the box built in without you having to implement them yourself.
Yeah,
So
I'm definitely in support of that, making it to the standard library. Hopefully it's done in a way that isn't incompatible with all the other types of loops we do already.
let me slightly annoy you. It's iterator dot range, so it will be a method on the iterator object.
Well, they're going to force people to accept the one
No,
true iterator object, huh?
yeah, but it does mean that it will work with for of. So if you want to do a for I over a range of values, you'd actually do a for of over a range. And the advantage of doing it over as an iterator is that it would never actually allocate the array. So you could do theoretically an infinite range and then break out of it when you don't need it anymore, when you reach the point that you're done with it.
I've got to ask the question though, because this is the thing that people say about iterators. Oh, it doesn't allocate the memory. In what real use case are you generating such a big number of things that
No, actually, that's not the right way to think about it. You either generate something that has a limited size, in which case you're absolutely correct, or you generate something that looks as if it's infinite sized, and then you break out of it when you reach the point where you don't need to go any further.
Okay, I'm not. I get the sense of what you're saying. I'm not sure where it's of practical
Think about
use in
think about
JavaScript.
think about for example, I've got the sequence of all the odd numbers, and then I go as far as I need to go.
It's like one of those things that people say for mathematical purity, but okay, show me the use case, baby.
Anyway, this is it for today. We've got something like 5 more questions remaining that we can do in some follow-up episodes or not. Hopefully I'll have more polls by then. But we're essentially out of time.
So Dan, did you calculate your margin of error for this polling? You know what your error bars are, or
no, I did not. But I'll put it this way, and that's another reason to follow me. I am betting that there's a certain skew in my answers, given that, thinking about the people who follow me, people like Dan Abramov and Rich Harris and Ryan Carniato and Adi Osmani and Mishko Hevery, just throwing out the names, So if you want to be amongst that refined crowd, you should follow me. And then you'll see my polls when they come out, and you can participate.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get to some picks, and yeah, by all means, if you have a question you think Dan should ask, throw that at him too. All right. AJ, why don't you start us off with our picks?
Okay, picks. Dang. One thing that I was thinking about recently is I'm now in the third book of the Chaos Walking trilogy, and that is pretty good. I'm going to be interested to watch the movie after I finish the books and kind of see
Which trilogy is that?
Chaos Walking. It
I'm not
starts with
sure.
the knife of never letting go. It's about a colony. It's kind of like a space western, but the people have crash landed their ship on a planet and they're not going to be able to get off of it. And then it's been almost a generation of people living there, and then the next settler ship is on its way. And so
So there was a movie in 2021.
I that sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
But the movie got really bad reviews, and I think the problem was that they tried to turn it into. I think this is what I heard is that they tried to turn it into a story about sexism, and it just didn't land with people because people didn't want to get preached at that wanted to watch that movie. They wanted the story, and so a lot of people said that they're really upset that they abused the movie, and that the book, if they'd followed the book instead of creating their own story arc, that the movie could have done well. And so that got me interested in the book because I liked the trailer for the movie and I didn't know it was based on a book, but the reviews were so bad that I just didn't go see it. But I saw a review that said, look, you got to read the books because the books actually are an interesting story. And the reason that it would be an easy movie to turn into a political message about sexism is because there is a divide. So everybody is infected with a bacteria or some pathogen or parasite or whatever that but it only affects males. It doesn't affect females.
Oh,
And
I
so
remember. I now remember the trailer. Okay. That
so
did they
all
project their thoughts, something like that?
yeah, so all males project their thoughts as something that, and the females can sense it, and this goes for animals as well as humans. So the females can sense the males, but the females don't project their own thoughts. So every impulsive thought that a man has, including about women, like is immediately available on display to anyone within earshot, let's say, of the man. And so this creates this rift in society. And there is a psychopath who does not like that women can hear his thoughts, and the women mysteriously disappear. And I'm in the third book, and that's still not entirely resolved. I'm still kind of waiting for the reveal of what happened. But yeah, so there's like this psychopath who needs complete control and the ability for others to hear thoughts, or like it's kind of difficult to explain because of the nature of the sci-fi-ness of it. But essentially, settlers land on a planet, the women disappear, the men can see and hear each other's thoughts, and a woman is discovered in the woods by the protagonist about like 2 or 3 chapters in, and it's his first encounter with a woman, and she is from the other settler ship that had been on its way for a generation. So that doesn't spoil too much, other than the first, it doesn't spoil any more than what's in the trailer for the movie. Right. So I'll just stick with that because we talked about it a whole bunch, and I don't want to take up the remainder of the hour with that. But
Interesting.
Yeah. So the Chaos Walking, the book trilogy, really interesting to me. We'll see what I think about it when I finish the third book here. But I'm about 2/3 through the third book, and I'm excited to see how things wrap together. And I think there's going to be a twist ending. I'm not sure if I'm going to like it or not.
All right. Steve, what are your picks?
Well, before we get to the high point of the episode, I do have another semi-legit pick. It's a blog post I came across on Hacker News from Ars Technica, and it's one of my favorite topics to read about. And it's titled "How Archaeologists Reconstructed the Burning of Jerusalem in 586 BC," or BCE if you're politically correct. Um, Basically, in the Old Testament, in Kings and Chronicles, talks about how Nebuchadnezzar came and completely destroyed Jerusalem in 586. He had captured it and taken off a lot of the Jews to Babylon, but a couple of the kings that stayed there decided to try to rebel, and he said, "Screw this! I'm taking y'all down." And so he basically completely destroyed the city. And so the article talks about a study that was done there that used uh, analytics of fire and how fire behaves, and a lot of the things we can tell now, with forensic, and what fire did to a building, to pretty much nail down, about that time is when Jerusalem was completely burned and destroyed. It's really pretty fascinating, especially if you're into fire science as I am. So anyway, we can put the link in the show notes for sure. And now it's time for the dad jokes of the week. I haven't been posting for a couple of weeks because I've been on vacation, but I think I can dig up a few that are worthy of being quoted here. So in the spirit of Christmas, did anybody hear about Rudolph's ride on the roller coaster when he went to the amusement park? You could say he held on for dear life. Now, I am I think true pizza aficionados would call me a heretic and shoot me on sight for saying this, that I do like pineapple on pizza. The pine and
Oh, me too.
swine, aka Canadian bacon and pineapple, is for me the
So
best
good.
pizza. So the other day I was cooking some, but I actually burned it. I found out it was it's called a Hawaiian pizza, as one of the names. I prefer pine and swine, but in the spirit of Hawaiian pizza, I should have cooked it at aloha temperature. Right. I love the groans. And then
Right.
finally, apologies to Pets fans, but I love this one when I saw it. Does anybody know why there are no cats on Mars?
No.
Because curiosity killed them all.
All right.
Curiosity is the
I don't
NASA
get it.
rover
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was on Mars. There's Curiosity. I forget what the other one was.
Oh,
Discovery, I think.
Yeah, something
Or
like
was that
that.
the space shuttle?
Yeah, that was the space shuttle.
Anyway.
Those are the dad jokes of the week.
All right, Dan, what are your picks?
Okay, so I've got two. My first pick is, and despite your frequent recommendations, Chuck, I've not really been into board games that much. But now, as a birthday present, our kids bought us Settlers of Catan.
Oh.
Is that how
That's
you
a good
guys
one.
pronounce it?
Mhm.
And we've been playing it like in the family, and it's been lots of fun. I've yet to win, but I'm trying. And it's very enjoyable, and it's a good game. I really like it. So yeah, we will see how long we're able to persist. We play it like once a week, something like that. We have a game night. Um, and so that would be my first pick. My second is, as everybody in the world knows, there's a war going on here, and everybody seems to be picking sides. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people don't really have the context. They don't know the history. Um, Now, it's you don't have to know the history to have an opinion. You can certainly have opinions about things that are happening, at present, without thinking about what happened 50 or 100 years ago. But I do think that having more context usually is helpful. And in what I would like to pick is this documentary, Israeli documentary. So I can't say about it that it's objective. It's from the Israeli perspective, but it does try to be even-handed, I have to say. It's a documentary that came out in the 80s called Pillar of Fire. It starts when Zionism started in the 1870s and goes all the way to the founding of Israel and a bit after that. And there's an English version that you can find on YouTube. By the way, one big advantage of the fact that it was done in the 80s is that they could still interview people who were there, or even as kids, people who have deceased since then. And what's really great about this series is that they were able to uncover a lot of original films from the various periods. So it's really great in that regard. And it was it's really good. I highly recommend it. So again, I can't say that it's like objective, or you won't get as much of the Arab perspective as you would get of the Jewish perspective. But still, again, I think they do try to present all the facts, and it's highly recommended for anybody who's really interested. So I'll link to the first I'll link to the search in YouTube that will find it. You will see like episodes 2 and 3 there. I don't know if all the episodes are on YouTube, but I think at least the first 4 or 5 are there. So it's, as I said, I highly recommend that. And those would be my picks for today.
Awesome. Well, I'll jump in here with a few of mine. And let me get that in the comments so people can find it on the YouTube video. All right. So the first one is I am excited to be going to another board game convention. This is my first time at this one. If y'all remember Joe Eames, who used to be on the show, he and his wife would often go to this one. It's called SaltCon, and it's here in Utah. It's up in Davis County, so it's like a little more than an hour from here, at the convention center up there. And yeah, it's 4 days. It goes Thursday through Sunday, and it's the same deal as most of the other ones, right? You just go and you play a bunch of board games. A couple of my friends are going, so we're all gonna. I think we'll hang out some of the time and then just go find fun games the rest of the time. Maybe without each other, but it'll be fun. I'm really, really looking forward to it. So I'm going to pick that as one of the board game picks that I have. And then I really do feel like I ought to pick a board game. So we played this with my kids last night. I know I've picked it here before. It's called Mysterium. And effectively you've got this ghost who's trying to give clues to a set of psychics regarding the murders that have happened in this house. And then if the psychics all solve the murders, each solve their own murder, the murder that's assigned to them, then the ghost, which is just another player, gives the final clue, which is a clue to their own murder, right? So one of the murders that the ghost is giving clues to is their own murder. And anyway, it's been a lot of fun to play. It says playtime's about 42 minutes. I think we've played, every time we've played, it's been an hour, maybe a little longer. It has a board game weight of 1.9. So it's kind of a party game, casual gamer level game. Anyway, the clues are basically cards that have just random pictures on it. So the ghost is trying to pass these clues over to the psychics, and then the psychics have to figure out what in the picture would lead them to pick the right culprit, the right location, or the right murder weapon. And yeah, I've been the ghost a couple of times, and I've played as the psychic, one of the psychics a bunch of times. And it's tricky because a lot of times what you wind up doing is you wind up getting a card or passing a card that has one or two elements in the card that indicate the thing that you're trying to get them to pick up on. but it's got a whole bunch of other stuff going on, right? They're all kind of random, weird, cards. So anyway, it is fun. It's a lot of fun. A few other things. I'm just kind of giving people some context for where we're going with top end devs. Now, I want to preface this just by saying I had kind of a major family event happen right before Christmas. And so I have been dealing with the fallout of that and helping my mom figure out some of the fallout from that. And I was going to have all this stuff ready by the beginning of the year. And so I'm playing a little bit of catch up. But by the time this comes out, you should be able to sign up. You can get the premium podcast episodes that don't have the ads in them for each of our shows. But the other thing that I'm doing is every month I'm going to have a producer call. And so if you buy the premium membership, you're a producer, and you can get on the call and you can talk to us about, hey, you haven't done a show on this, or hey, I think it'd be really great if you talk to this person, right? So maybe there's something we didn't cover with Mishko Hevery, or maybe we should get Adi Asmani back on, or maybe there's something that is inspired by one of Dan's polls, right? So you can get on the call and you can tell me, I'm going to invite these guys, but I don't know what their schedules all look like, so I can't guarantee anything that way. But then we'll get those scheduled, and so you can kind of have a voice in what we talk about on the show. The other thing I'm putting together is I'm putting together videos for Ruby, JavaScript, and React, and those are going to come out every week. And what I'm doing is I'm just building apps, and then we'll talk about some of the ideas or ins and outs of any libraries or techniques or anything that I use to build them. So the React ones are obviously going to be React. If it's not React and it's JavaScript, I think I'm going to build a Discord bot in JavaScript for the JavaScript one. And then for the Ruby one, I've got a library I want to modify. There are a couple of apps I want to build, and I may or may not build them in Rails. So that kind of gives you an idea. And then finally, if you're looking for content from other experts that you can participate in, more of kind of I don't want to say webinar, but it's kind of a webinar, but it's also going to have a very strong Q&A element to it, then you can go check out JavaScript Geniuses. I'm doing that for JavaScript, Ruby, and React as well. But you can get the JavaScript Geniuses, and you can just show up every week, and we'll either do a Q&A, or we'll have an expert on, or something like that. So it's kind of like your JavaScript meetup, except it'll be online, and we're going to make sure we have networking events so you can get to know each other, because I feel like that's a critical part of having a successful career these days. So anyway, putting all that together, if you go to javascriptjabber.com/premium, you can see where to get onto the premium podcast. The other one is called JavaScript. What is it? JavaScript Clips, I think, is what I called it. JavaScript Clips, and then JavaScript Geniuses. And I have the domain. So if you go to the domains, it'll take you to the sign up pages. So anyway, that's what I got for picks. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Till next time, folks, Max out.